And let's start tonight with this voice. Now, my fear has been that the Liberals under opposition leader Peter Dutton are walking into a trap. Dutton still won't say if the Liberals are against the Albanese government's planned voice, which is a sort of an advisory parliament just for Aborigines, written forever in our constitution. The government's going to ask us to vote on this for some time near the end of the year. And Dutton should be saying, well, is it crazy? I mean, this is racism, this is apartheid. Absolutely no to Labor's voice. Instead, he's telling the government, show us the details. Here is Dutton just last week.
I'm speaking on behalf of millions of Australians who are asking the reasonable questions. How would people be voted onto the voice? How would regional areas be represented? Australians, I think, are reasonably saying if we're going to be asked to vote for constitutional change, which enshrines an arrangement, we should know what the arrangement is.
Now, like I said, Dutton could be walking into a trap. The government could suddenly say, well, here are those details you want. There you go. And then what are the Liberals going to do? You know, they're going to quibble over mere detail, or will they say, well, actually, we're against this voice because of a fundamental principle. It's racist as well as useless. But Labor could then say, well, why didn't you say so last year or the year before? You've only now discovered you've got these fundamental principles. So that's the trap. Except never underestimate the stupidity of the Albanese government and the people pushing this voice. Because it turns out that the response late last night from the government's Minister for Indigenous Australians, Linda Burney, turns out to be bizarre, full of fake guarantees that it's going to have no power. And most of all, it contains a big warning sign that this government is selling out our basic democratic principles, especially by denying Aborigines true democracy. Now, I've invited Minister Burney onto this show to explain herself, but again, she's refused, and that's kind of typical because you probably have noticed that Burney and some other government ministers avoid debating this voice with journalists who are against it. Too scared, I guess. And no wonder. Let me show you just one of the string of tweets that Burney put out last night, very late, as an answer to what she called people trying to mislead you about this voice. Well, let's see who's misleading who. Burney says this voice will provide independent advice to Parliament and government and will be chosen by First Nations people based on the wishes of local communities. Now note that, chosen based on the wishes of local communities, right? I'll come back to that. And it'll be representative of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Well, that turns out to be a lot of bunkum. Note the danger there, the signs. That wording should actually frighten every Australian who believes in democracy, and especially frighten Aborigines. Burney did not say that the members of this voice will be elected. She said they'll be chosen based on the wishes of local communities. And that fudging is actually deliberate. You go to report to the government on the co-design of this voice, and it does say there, yes, leave it to the locals to decide if they want to elect their representatives, democracy, or have some people in the tribe select them. Or maybe they'll just go with the existing tribal leaders, following traditional law. So they're saying that some tribes in Australia where the big men rule, they're going to keep ruling the roost. Bugger democracy, there'll be none of that. Now, I find that's appalling. Democracy defines Australia. It's fundamental to our freedoms. And we've long said to the world, you too, become democratic and free. That's what we say to Communist China. But here's the Albanese government thinking, well, on the other hand, maybe some Aborigines, they can't handle democracy. Let them go back to their tribal ways with a strong rule and just a select few pick. And I find that is sick. That's regressive. That's a sellout. That's treating Aborigines as primitives who can't be trusted with things like democracy. But remember the other thing that Burney tweeted there that I showed you, that his voice will be representative of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Well, that's not quite true either. This is another blow against democracy. We've had about 500 tribes. No one's really sure how many are left, hundreds. But this voice, says this co-designed paper the government seems to be following, this voice will have just 24 members. So already you see smaller tribes risk getting pushed aside. The bigger ones will rule. But look at something else. It's an amazing gerrymander that gives Aborigines in some areas much more power in this voice than Aborigines in others, more than 25 times more. If the government goes ahead with this plan for a voice of 24 members, it says, well, that choice is going to have, that voice is going to have 2 from each state and territory, 2 more from the Torres Strait, plus 1 for Torres Strait Islanders who live on the mainland, and 5 more members for Aborigines in the remote areas of certain states and territories. So let me show you what that looks like, because it doesn't look like democracy. That means Aborigines in the ACT, for instance, are going to have 1 representative on the voice for just 4,700 of them. Torres Strait Islanders, they're going to have 1 member on the voice for every 11,000 of them. Aborigines in the Northern Territory, they'll have 1 on the voice for every 91,000. You really see how unfair this is getting. And it gets very much worse in the states with the most Aborigines. Aborigines in Queensland will have 1 representative for every 91,000 people. And Aborigines in New South Wales, they'll have even less say. 1 representative for every 113,000 people. So you see there, Aborigines in Canberra are going to have more than 25 times more power on the voice than Aborigines in New South Wales. Is that fair? That's not democracy for Aborigines. And it's not democracy for the rest of us either. To have a separate parliament, an extra advisory one, for now at least, for people of just one race? Seriously? Now, Linda Burney, the minister, she didn't even try last night to argue why we should now be racist in our constitution, divided by race. She just says, oh, well, look, we actually need this voice so that Aborigines have a say in decisions affecting them. And she says, oh, yes, of course. But Aborigines are already consulted. Nearly 5% of our federal politicians say they're Aboriginal, when Aborigines make up less than 4% of our population. They're overrepresented in Parliament if you're going by the old race count of Labor. Plus, there are more than 2,700 Aboriginal corporations. There are more than 70 big Aboriginal organisations representing Aborigines. And there are lots of land councils too, some of them very powerful. The idea that Aborigines are not consulted is a lie. But now, it's worse, because we know this voice is not just racist. It's not just useless and sold on this lie. It's also fundamentally undemocratic for Aborigines as well as for the rest of us. So vote no.